strict on in the studio is tuning and performance. You can have the best amp and cab in the world, but if the performance isn't there, then you're not going to bring out the true tone. Tuning is extremely important. Tuning is what, sometimes it can be a feeling thing. Like I've had bands say to me, oh, I don't hear it's out of tune. Why do you keep telling me to tune up? And I say, well, look, you don't hear it, but sometimes it's more of a feeling. So it can make the song sound a bit, you know, sick, or gives you a bit of an awkward feeling. So the average person who might know it's out of tune, it just kind of, like I said, gives it that yuck feeling. And in the same sense, once you start layering guitars, so, you know, you do your first track, if that tuning isn't spot on the first pass, when you start layering, it's going to get worse and worse. So you're double tracking, quad tracking, sometimes more than quad tracking. So you're just building up on a bunch of out of tune. It might only be out of tune by a really small margin, but like I said, it builds. And then when you get to the bass guitar, it makes it even worse, and so forth. So suddenly, you know, you're doing vocals and your singer's trying to sing to guitars and bass that are a bit off. So it's really important you get the tuning right, and that's why we're going to be looking into different types of guitars and systems and setups to help you get your tuning right when you're recording in the studio. The key to a good guitar tone starts with the guitar. You know, you can have a really nice amp and cab, but if the guitar isn't right, you're not going to get a good guitar tone. So I just wanted to show some examples of some guitars, and you know, I didn't want to go into it too much because this is about recording guitar, not so much about instruments and how they're made and so on. But with recording rock and metal and hardcore and even some punk stuff, with the drop tuning, it's really important you're either using a baritone or a 7-string guitar, or even an 8-string, which is becoming common now. I'm a fan of 7-string guitar. I believe that, you know, once you start, a normal guitar doesn't really like to go lower than D. So, you know, your standard Gibsons and Fenders and that sound great when they're just in your regular tuning, but once you start dropping the guitar, they don't seem to like it unless you get them modded. So, you know, 7-string guitar is a good start. It's hard to get a thin sound out of these guitars. They just sound thick, and that's probably, you know, mostly because of the neck is so thick. And yeah, they just sound really good. Obviously, there's cheaper ones and there's great sounding, you know, 7-string guitars, but try and get yourself a good one. The right gauge of string is still important, and it's not perfectly going to stay in tune. When you drop down to as low as, you know, A or B, or even from C down, you're still going to get some tuning problems. So it's never going to be perfect, but by having a baritone or 7-string guitar, you're going to just eliminate another problem that you don't want to deal with when you're tracking guitars. I was talking about the 7-string guitar and 8-string, and I did mention a baritone guitar. So some of you out there might be like, well, what's a baritone guitar? A baritone is basically a guitar that has a longer scale neck. So, you know, most guitars have your standard sort of, I think it's 24-inch length neck. Don't quote me on that, but close to that. And while they sound good when you're tuned in your standard tuning, which is E or even maybe E flat down to D, like I mentioned before, once you start dropping the guitar really low, it's not going to handle the tuning. So the longer scale the neck, the better the guitar's going to stay in tune. So you can get 26, 26.5, I think 27 works best. I've even seen baritones that are as long as 29-inch. So yeah, so this is what it looks like. Some people find it a bit more uncomfortable to play because of the longer neck. I actually think it's more comfortable, but it really helps with the tuning. And if you know, maybe you don't want to play this live, but at least have one for the studio. And I can't stress enough how important the tuning thing is. And if you're not properly in tune, especially when layering guitars, and when it comes to quad tracking in particular, you really want the tuning to be spot on. So regularly tuning is really important. And if you're using a baritone and it's a 6-string, or using a 7-string, that's the way to go. If you can't, you've only got a regular scale neck 6-string guitar, then that's okay. You're just going to have to work with it, but definitely take it to an expert to have it set up, neck adjustment, intonation, all those things looked at. You don't want to be coming into the studio with a guitar that's not set up and hasn't had the strings changed and hasn't been looked after, because you're going to have tuning problems. You're then going to have to, well, it's going to cost you more money because you're going to spend more time in the studio. And I've even gotten into situations where the guitar is so bad that I actually have to record the song in sections to where, you know, the riff's being played. So say the band's, you know, playing a riff where it's sort of hangs around 1st to 3rd fret, we have to tune to those notes because, you know, when they go up here, the intonation's out, so it's sounding out of tune. So then I have to, you know, go up here, tune to this part for that part of the song, and so forth. So it becomes really time consuming, it stresses everyone out, and then takes up the time of the band in the studio. So make sure your guitar's set up, make sure it's right, use a baritone or a 7-string, and if not, just make sure you really look after your guitar and you come in prepared, because it really is the beginning stage of a good guitar sound and a good performance as well.